Good morning, church. Can you hear me? Good morning. It's so good to be here. I'm very, very excited. And as I said a couple of weeks ago, I'm very excited to meet you all. I've met some of you so far. Thank you. Just get myself set up. But thank you. Just want to say a massive thank you for being so warm and welcoming already. There's lots of smiling faces and I'm just very blessed, so thank you. A few facts about me. I've lived in 5 different houses. I went to one school right through from kindy to grade 12, and through that time I had my father teach me, I had 2 aunties teach me, and other distant relatives. I grew up with cricket on in the background during summer. I am very much a sweet tooth. I enjoy reading and art and music, lots and lots of music. I grew up learning to play the piano, though I still can't sight read to save my life, so one day I'll have to force myself to learn all of that. But music has always been a big part of my life, and when I was younger, I attended a church that was very traditional, and we sung the same hymn every week right at the beginning. In fact, I might test you now and see if you can finish the phrase. Praise God from whom all... All right, what about this one? Would you be free from the burden of sin? There you go. All right, how about this one? It's a bit more subtle. Lift up the trumpet and loud let it ring. Yes, I love that. Isn't it cool how we just grew up learning these things? I watched my parents coordinate programs in church. They would organise the whole program, and much like Carol's done today, and they would be really intentional about putting all these different elements into the worship service. And they would also worship lead, and my dad in more recent years has been in a quartet, and he just loves singing the melodies and the harmonies. In fact, there's one thing about my family. I don't know about the rest of you, what kind of families you come from, but whenever I would go to my friend's house and it was somebody's birthday, they would have this thing where they'd all pick a different key. They'd all pick a note and they would start singing happy birthday. Not so much in my family. You see, by the end of the song, we'd be in about 4-part harmony. I think Kendall and Linnell can attest to that. And as I grew older, I realised just how abnormal that was. Anyway, that's a side note. Another thing about me is that during college, I had a few different jobs. I was a cleaner. I worked as a checkout chick in the bookshop. And I think my favourite job was when I worked in the Institute of Worship with Lyle Heiss and Val Mayhill, if any of you know them. And I loved it. The concept of worship has always fascinated me. I'm very much of a, look at the sunset, kind of stargazer kind of person. And those experiences would invoke a very emotional response in me. I think the very first experience I had on this journey of worshipping was when I was very young. I can't even remember how old I was, but it was at Easter time. And I don't know, has anyone been to Road to Bethlehem before? It was a similar experience to that, when you're walking along a journey and you've got different scenes of the story. And for this time, it was the Easter story. And it was the first time that it was internalized for me just how amazing Jesus' life, death, and resurrection was. And as I got older, and especially when I was involved with the Institute of Worship, I began to question what worship is and just the whole concept, because I tend to agree with a man named A.W. Tozer, who is a preacher, pastor, and author, who said, without worship, we go about miserable. Today I want to share with you 3 facts that I've learned over the years about worship. We're going to look at some scriptures and hopefully discover some new things. But the first one is that true worship is in fact unavoidable. There's a man called David Foster Wallace who died a few years ago. He was a great American writer and novelist. And he was a leading light in postmodern writing, so very abstract kind of stuff. And people would discuss his work all the time. But a few months before he died, he gave a commencement address at a liberal arts college. And this speech was unusually direct for him. He said, "Here's something that's weird but true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshipping. Everyone worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it Jesus Christ or Allah, be it Yahweh, or even the wicked mother goddess, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things," he says, "if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. Worship power, you will end up feeling weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to numb you to your own fear. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out." He says, but the insidious thing about these forms of worship is not necessarily that they're evil or sinful. It's that they're unconscious. It's a default setting in all of us. I found that a really interesting comment for him to make, being a completely secular man. Now, many atheists were upset that he would suggest such a thing, that there are no such thing as atheists. They say that worship is sitting down in a building at a religious institution and observing religious services, much like we are doing today. They say it's ridiculous to call anything you live for worship. But I think David Foster Wallace was onto something. Because we all choose something. And when I was just a little girl walking through that Easter program, I chose Jesus. I chose to worship this Jesus because for the first time I realised that he had done something earth-moving and heaven-moving just for me. So fact number 1, worship is unavoidable. So my first challenge to you is this: who or what do you worship? A few weeks ago, I sent around some texts to a bunch of people, and I said, can you tell me what worship, the word worship, means to you? And how do you personally worship best? I got a whole bunch of answers back, and many of them came back and they said, through music. And I love that. You know, grew up with family, music in the family, and I always remember those stories from the Bible. You know, you got Paul and Silas singing in prison when an earthquake comes and sets them free. I always thought that was really cool. David singing and dancing before the Lord. Then you've got Miriam, who worship-led and praised God after the victory at the Red Sea. There's story after story about music being a response to God. But at the same time, in today's Christian culture, I don't know if you've noticed it, but there seems to be a culture spreading that says that music is the only way to worship, or that your Sabbath, be it Saturday or Sunday for some people, is the only time that you worship God. You know, a church program, as we've seen this morning, tends to have a welcome, a prayer, offering, and a time of worship, which is not a bad thing that it's called that, don't get me wrong, but there are wars going on, wars that split churches left, right, and centre, all about the style of worship, about emotion in church, about hand raising, about instruments, and all these different things. And it's heartbreaking to know that corporate worship, something that should unite us in our adoration of God, ends up causing division. If you have your Bibles, I want you to turn with me to Amos. It's not a book we often tend to look at. But there's a passage in here that seems quite shocking when you read it first. quite controversial. It seems like it's not talking about the God we serve at all. So Amos chapter 5, verses 21 to 23. It's on the screen for you as well. It says, I hate, this is God talking, I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps, I will not listen. Does that sound like God? Rejecting a form of worship. Since when did he do that? Another thing about this Christian culture, I've heard it often, is that God will accept anything from you if it's your worship. It's a nice thought, but it's almost a little bit dangerous. Because one of the first stories in the Bible, after the creation, after the fall, we have the story of Cain and Abel, who both presented an offering of worship to God. But one brother offered to God exactly what God had requested, while the other chose whatever he deemed good enough and offered that instead. And we all know that story didn't end well. So my question is, here in this Amos passage, is what the people offering to God, is that true worship? Because God doesn't seem to like it. I'd like to suggest today that sometimes God doesn't want our music. He wants more than that. Let's keep reading. Verse 23 and 24. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps I will not listen. But, he says, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Okay, so there's the key. Now this brings me to my second fact of worship. And that is that true worship is a lifestyle. We've already heard it this morning. Carol's done an awesome job of our program weaving the theme in. But true worship is a lifestyle. Now come back in time with me, reverse the time machine, and imagine this. It's a hot night. You can hear chatter of people hanging out at a party. And there's a little bit of awkwardness in the air because it's a bit of a motley crew. People from all walks of life are gathered. But generally things are going well. There's enough food. Everyone's behaving. No vases have been broken. The guest of honour is comfortable, so it seems. All is well. And suddenly, your nose picks up something that smells really good. Actually, it smells expensive. The last time you smelled that was at your sister's wedding a couple of years ago. And I mean, she borrowed a few drops from a wealthy relative. And then you see, it's Mary. The awkwardness in the room just escalates as she approaches Jesus, the guest of honour, lounging around the table, eating bread and figs, and she unties her hair. Let's halt for a moment and consider the context. This woman has had 7 demons inside of her throughout her life. We don't know if they were at the same time or what happened, but 7 demons. We know through the Bible and through what Ellen White says that her uncle led her into the sin that made her the mockery of the town. Perhaps that sin was what brought the demons, we don't know. But socially, her life, all the stuff that she carried, that provided the scandal and the gossip of the town. But then Jesus stepped into her life. And you heard how he forgave her. You heard how he expelled those demons. You heard how he transformed her life into an adoring disciple that sat at his feet. And here she was, literally pouring out a year's wages. That's like 50,000 plus today, you know. She poured that out onto his feet. An extravagant act of worship. Ellen White says that Mary Magdalene was the only one who truly understood who Jesus was, why he came, and what he was about to go through. And so because she knew that, She poured out this ridiculous, lavish, over-the-top display of love, adoration, and worship, pouring out her finances, earned by doing who knows what, might I add, spending what was left of her dignity and her self-respect, pouring out her most prized possession. And what was Jesus' response? He calls it beautiful. Let's go back even further in time. A tired old man gasps for breath at the top of a mountain. A young boy with scratched arms from hauling an armful of firewood. Hey, Dad, where's the sacrifice? I've got the wood, but where's the lamb? Now, I'm not a parent, so I can't claim to know an inch of what Abraham was going through when God asked him to be willing to sacrifice his son. Of course, we know today, having looked at the story, that it was a test and to parallel God's plan of salvation. But can you imagine the uproar if this story happened today? I can just imagine the headlines. Religious father takes knife to son's throat to appease his God. He'd be labelled unmentionable things because he was willing to do what God had asked in an act of worshipful obedience. Remember that verse from Amos? Righteousness. You see, Abraham trusted God so implicitly, so deeply, that he was willing to give up his everything. He had already moved away from the home he had loved to go to an unnamed and unknown location. And now he must give up his pride and joy, his beloved promised son. And to me, that story, that act of his, is the most raw, difficult, and incredible acts of worship in all of Scripture. He lived with that righteousness that Amos talked about through absolute obedience. Now, I don't know what kind of lifestyles you all have, but like Mary and Abraham, when you adopt a lifestyle of anything in particular, it affects everything that you do. That's the point of it being called a lifestyle. We've got hipster lifestyles. Some people are vegans. Some are into fitness. We have those who adopt sport. You might have heard the slogan, ball is life. Those who do music, I work with one of these, constantly picking their guitars, drumming the tablecloth, you know. Others play computer games. When you take on a lifestyle, it affects everything. And that's what these Bible characters displayed. Mary Magdalene, Abraham, Paul and Silas with their voices in prison, Miriam with her tambourine, Hannah in her fervent petition for a child, Joshua in his prayerful leadership, Joseph in his diligent, hard work, and Dorcas with her needle and thread. Every single one of these Bible characters lived a life of devotion. They worshipped with everything they had, their song, their money, their dignity, their most precious, prized possessions, their time, and even their families. They held nothing back. And I think that's what Paul is talking about in this verse in Romans 12, verses 1. He says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." It doesn't get much simpler than that. But the Message does paraphrase it beautifully. I'm sure you've heard it before. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life. In other words, your Sunday to Friday life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. True worship is a lifestyle. So my second challenge to you is this: is worshipping God at the core of your lifestyle? Your sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life. Now, finally, my third point is this: true worship is counterculture. Might seem odd for me to say that because before I said that everyone worships, so how can it be counterculture? But true worship, the kind of worship that Scripture uplifts, is truly counterculture. There's a licensed psychologist, author, and columnist named Dr. Perry Buffington, who wrote that research psychologists have found that there are at least 3 situations when we are not ourselves. Have a think about that. There may be more in your life. First, the average person puts on airs when he visits the lobby of a fancy hotel. Next, the typical Jane Doe will try to hide her emotions and bamboozle the salesman when she enters a new car showroom. And finally, as we take our seat in church or synagogue, we try to fake out the Almighty that we've really been good all week. You see, worship is counterculture because to truly worship is to truly surrender. You can't fake it with God. He not only sees your actions, but he knows your heart. To truly surrender is to turn our eyes from ourselves, from our selfies, to Jesus, to the one who created us, who gave everything for us. I watched a video during this week, it came up on my Facebook feed, about all these star facts and how big they are in comparison to each other. And it just blew my mind. I don't know if you've ever seen some of those. Those numbers, like trillion, billion light years away and all of that, they're just incomprehensible. We can't fathom. But we worship the God who created all of that. Chris Tomlin, who composed a lot of the worship music that we sing, he echoed this sentiment and he says, you can't get a glimpse of God's goodness and God's grace and think anything of yourself. The text that I sent out a couple of weeks ago that I mentioned before, I got some really golden statements back about what worship is and how they worshipped best, and I just wanted to share a couple of those with you. First of all, from one woman, said, I used to think that the best way I worshipped was through music, but now I think it is in prayer and daily conversations with him. I find that my prayer is less a set time and more a constant conversation and thought process. If I'm honest, I'm thinking about God and life and all important aspects of it throughout the day, because it's just better that way. A teenager said this next one. He said, worship is rededicating myself to God and opening myself to his will and purpose for my life. Isn't that awesome? And my personal favourite response said, inner worship is the kind where we try and grasp the amazingness of who he is. It's hard not to fall more in love when you're learning more about his character. What's the common denominator between all these responses? Surrender, humility, rededication, that whole idea of just offering of yourself. So when worship for you becomes an authentic lifestyle, a lifestyle of chasing after Jesus, of letting him transform your life and responding to that with everything you are and with all of your obedience like Abraham, worship becomes simply an act of giving God his breath back, as Louis Giglio puts it. I love that. Worship is simply giving God his breath back. So my final challenge to you is this. Are you worshipping God in true surrender, or are you just going through the motions, particularly on the 7th day of the week? I just want to finish with the story behind the song we're about to sing. You may have sung it before, but it wasn't until I heard the story behind it that the words actually became real for me. It was composed by Matt Redman, who is a worship leader in a big church, Sunday church over in America. And this church was on the forefront of modern worship, you know, a lot of big songs composed there, like this one. But the pastor sensed at this particular time that in all the excellence of their craft, there is a heart of praise missing from their gathered worship. I'll read to you what he says. The pastor of our church, Mike, did a brave thing, Redmond recalls. We stopped using the PA and projectors, all this stuff, packed away our instruments for a while, a few weeks, and gathered in an adjoining room with nothing but our voices and Bibles, and of course our hearts. This led us into a whole new season. We stripped away anything associated with style, preference, or performance, and there was a real sense of discovering the heart of worship again. Before long, he says, we reintroduced the musicians and sound system as we'd gained a new perspective that worship is all about Jesus. And he commands a response in the depths of our souls, no matter what the circumstance and setting. This song, he says, simply describes what occurred after that worship renewal. It was different. The songs of our hearts had caught up with the songs of our lips. The songs of our hearts had caught up with the songs of our lips. I love that he says no matter what the circumstance or setting. So when you're walking down the aisles at Woolworths, when you're changing a tyre by the side of the road, when you're teaching a classroom of rowdy kids, placing a Band-Aid on your daughter's knee, cooking a meal for your loved ones or someone less fortunate than you, giving a lift to a hitchhiker, sharing positivity in the office, giving someone an encouraging note, placing your money and therefore trust in God's providence in the offering bag at church, or offering a prayer from a broken spirit and battered heart. These are beautiful acts of worship. These are the kinds of worship that God is after, as he wants all of you, not just 1/7. As the band comes up, I just want to invite you guys up. I want to read you these lyrics before we sing them, just keeping in mind the story behind it. When the music fades, all is stripped away and I simply come, longing just to bring something that's of worth that will bless your heart. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within. Through the way things appear, you're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing that I've made it, when it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. Says the King of endless worth, no one could express how much you deserve. And though I'm weak and poor, all I have is yours, every single breath. So I just want to invite you to stand now and give God his breath back, both now and for the rest of the week.